Driving at night puts the world on pause. One lane, a headlight, the radio leaning into the dark. Tonight's 6 stories are about exactly that, ordinary drives that became something else. These are true style accounts, adapted for clarity. Don't listen alone. The road was the kind that promises nothing. 2 lanes, a milk bottle moon, and trees that come close enough together to form a tunnel. We'd been at a wedding in the next city and were tired, the kind of tired that makes you talk about nothing at high volume. Driving home at 1:30 a.m., my wife in the passenger seat and my brother in the back, we were quiet in the way people are when they're surrendering to sleep. I noticed the first car when we pulled out onto the highway. A sedan away back in the left lane, headlights steady. That's the sort of thing you look at and turn your head away from. The first impression was normal. Someone else on the road. Then, at the next interchange, the sedan moved with us. Not passing, not accelerating to leave. It matched our speed, then braked a subtle amount when we braked. Following a car does not require talent. It requires intent. First, I shrugged it off. Maybe the driver had a similar route. Maybe it was a nervous neighbor. The road past our exit was straight for miles. It was easy to stay behind someone if you weren't paying attention. I decided to take the next exit to see if they'd pass us. I slowed. My wife stirred and said, "Honey, are you okay?" The sedan took the exit too and tucked in behind us like a shadow. The pattern crawled through my mind then. Same brake light cadence, same tiny adjustments, a mimic. It felt like the shape of him was learning to follow us. We tried something stupid. The old driving trick of a lane change and a small burst of speed. On the straightaway, I planted my foot and moved to the left. The sedan moved too. We crested a little overpass and I watched the driver in my rear view. It was too dark to see the face, but the posture was strange. The driver leaned a little forward like someone doing too much studying. My brother made a joke about being famous. I knew it was a joke. It didn't land. I called a friend and kept him on speaker to hear a human voice other than our own. The sedan followed us for 20 more miles. We stopped at a 24-hour gas station to use the restroom and switch drivers. The sedan idled out on the street while we were inside, headlights like patient eyes. When my brother came out, an officer was already circling the pumps. I flagged him down, voice sharp with that cheap worry. He checked the lot, said there was no visible criminal behavior. "You're safe here," he told us, but he said it like a man reading from a script. We left the station and made another plan. We'd each drive in shifts, and I would call my neighbor to have his truck blocking our driveway when we pulled in. We thought to plan like people trying to stay in a movie. The sedan followed, kept the same distance even when we speed a little. At one point, I took the highway to a road that runs closer to the river with single-lane bridges and places a car can't pass without turning around. I hoped to lose him in the geography. Halfway through the county line, the sedan blinked its brights twice and disappeared from the mirror. I exhaled like someone bleeding air. My hands actually trembled on the wheel. We made it home 20 minutes later. My neighbor's truck did not block our drive. That's when the absurdity of it hit me. In the morning, I walked the route with a sober cup of coffee and saw a pattern of tire scuffs in the roadside dirt that matched where we'd sped and where we'd braked. The officer who returned our call said it sounded like stalking if it was done deliberately. He said they would run the car's plates, but he said that with the slow, bureaucratic patience of someone who knows the system. A week later, the detective called. The sedan had been registered to a rental company. No criminal history, no hits. But the same car had been reported on a forum as the one that follows in 2 other counties. Folklore, a neighbor had said, builds itself around anything a little unblessed. Months went by. We sleep awkwardly now. My wife checks the locks 3 times and leaves an extra car light on when we go out. Once, while I was driving with the windows down in the afternoon, I saw a sedan in the next lane, same model, same odd posture, and for an instant the world felt the size of a coin. I speeded up this time. They did not respond. The truth we live with is small and private. The car never hit us. The plates seemed clean. But stalkers don't need violence to take something. They take the right to feel like the world is private and unobserved. That is less visible on paper, but it sits with you in the dark with a persistence like static. Sometimes the road has company you never asked for. I have a rule that I break with terrible frequency. Don't pick up strangers at night. You tell yourself these things will be quick. Someone stranded near a turnoff, a person on the shoulder with a thumb and a hungry story. But rules feel different when you're alone on a wet night and someone's standing there under the halo of a flickering light. I was returning from a client visit, road quiet, coffee cheap and cold in the holder when I saw them. A young woman by the exit ramp, coat too thin, thumb up, eyes the kind you worry makes children sympathetic. It was around midnight. Against my own better judgment, I slowed, rolled the window down, and asked where she was going. She said, softly and without hesitation, "Anywhere, just downtown." Her voice sat like a single fold of cloth. I pulled over. She climbed in without dramatic thanks and sat behind me, hands in her lap, quiet. For the first 10 minutes, we didn't speak. She smelled like smoke and peaches. I thought of movie rules and the ways they always lean into trouble. She asked me if I could take her to a friend's place 2 towns over. I said yes because I was dumb and because people who take the wrong paths sometimes accept kindness. About 20 minutes later, I took a left onto a narrow road with houses spaced like favors. She tapped me on the shoulder and asked me to stop at the corner because my phone has a dead zone. I parked, and when I turned the engine off, she didn't move. She muttered something about being cold, and I offered my jacket. She smiled and said, "No, it's okay." The streetlight bulb over the corner was blown, and the darkness felt like velvet. When I turned back a minute later, she was gone. No one slides out of a car without a sound. I checked the back seat, under the seat, in the trunk inevitably, and when I walked up the sidewalk, I found footprints leading into a half-lit alley between 2 houses. They disappeared near a storm grate like someone had stepped over a seam and been swallowed. I called the police. They took my statement with the breezy efficiency of someone who's heard 1,000 versions of "she vanished." They asked the usual. What did she say? Did she give a name? I told them a small thing that she said anywhere, and that the way she had said it felt too practiced to be random. The officers checked and found no recent missing person reports that matched her description. "People make the choice to move," the sergeant said gently, as if the language of choice could mask panic. A week later, a neighbor told me she'd seen a woman matching the description walking without a jacket on the same stretch at dawn. Another witness said she'd stood on the bridge and looked over the railing and then gone without a sound. A thought settled. Maybe she had never been in my car. Maybe she'd been someone who walks at night and uses headlights as punctuation, slipping in beside you like a comma. Or worse, maybe she used me, the car, as a place to rest her weight for a few minutes before she left again. The strangest part is the little micro-evidence. A stray hair on the seat, peach-smelling residue on my steering wheel, and a tiny dent in the center console that hadn't been there before. None of it proved anything, and all of it convinced me there was a story, the kind police tape doesn't wrap. I thought about not telling people because when you say, "she vanished," you invite the world's polite dismissal. But another thing happened. I started seeing her in other places. On message boards, people posted about a girl who asked for rides and then stepped off into nowhere. Someone labeled her the moonwalker in one thread. The next winter, a tourist blog published a picture taken on a cloudy night, grainy and distant. But in the background, a small figure stood under a lamp as if it had always been there. In the end, the case remained a small file and a little exasperated shrug. The police closed the docket with a notation, "No evidence of foul play." They underlined "no evidence" twice. The certainty of that phrase sticks like a bruise. What's left is the quiet habit. I check the back seat twice now when I pick up someone, and I think twice about stopping on a dark corner. I tell myself one more time that sometimes things notice you and then vanish. There's no neat ending. Only the crossroads and the sunless nights where you drove and a piece broke off. Not every passenger stays for the whole trip. My college buddies and I used to drive nights for the thrill of being late fast-to-nothing treks across empty interstates. The stupid, youthful logic. On one October night, we set out to chase diner lax at 2 in the morning about town. It started as a joke. 3 of us in a truck, jukebox blasting, cheap coffee from a thermos. Halfway through the counties, we kept noticing the headlights. A pickup far behind that hung at the same distance as if on some invisible leash. We tried to lose it hairpin turns, slowing down then whipping the wheel so it would pass. Didn't. When we stopped at a 24-hour diner and laughed about it over pancakes, the truck parked a few tables over like a quiet neighbor. The driver didn't get out. He sat and watched through the window. At first, it was a game of nerves. One of us, Mark, waved and set the cup down like he meant to be brave. When the truck left, it left the same way it had followed. Calm, measured. We joked about it and left like idiots. Out on the road, the truck was back where it always had been. We called our girlfriends, tried to sound funny. We drove through empty stretches and found we were being boxed in by the dark. It made us twitchy. We took the exit to a truck stop and parked under sodium light while Mark called a friend who works the police dispatcher. Mark said, "If they pull up next to us, I'll go ask." He smiled and his teeth flashed in the cab light. That's the kind of grin that promises trouble and then does not deliver. We moved after 20 minutes and the truck followed. This time the driver got out on a quiet, desolate road and walked toward us with slow politeness. He had a hat pulled down and a flashlight that he kept aimed toward the ground like someone reading the lines in the pavement. He stopped 15 feet from our tailgate and asked a question in a voice so plain it was like a neutral color. "You boys having a good time?" he said. We said yes, but meanly. He then left and walked back to his truck. He turned his hat and his face shone wrong like a photograph exposed too long, eyes too reflective for the light. He waved and drove away. We did something we all criticized later. We followed him. Because after a while, not following the thing that follows you is a whim broken into practice. We tailed for half an hour and then the truck turned off into a thin road and stopped at the end of a long gravel drive. We pulled in behind and the place was empty. A derelict farmhouse with a porch that sagged like tired lungs. We went to the porch and knocked. The door opened and no one answered. We called out and the house swallowed our voices. Inside were the bones of a family. A rusted playpen, a row of shoes by a bench, pictures on a wall yellowed at the edges. On a small table was a jar with coins a child might have left. The truck's engine was still warm. We left because we felt stupid for trespassing. We left because somewhere in deciding we had brought something upon ourselves, we feared the consequences. On the drive back, the truck was behind us again. At some point, Mark suggested we call the police. He dialed from the cab and described the truck. The dispatcher said they had no reports. "If it's following and making you feel unsafe, stay on the line and head to the nearest patrol area," the dispatcher said. We tried. The truck kept up. When we finally stopped and turned to confront the driver at some gas station lights, the truck was gone. No one had seen it leave. Surveillance footage from the pumps the next day showed an empty road at the time we had seen the truck pull away. No pickup, no footprints, nothing. The rational part of me says it was a prank or the brain rewriting memory under stress. The less rational part says we drove alongside a shadow that wanted to show us it could be wherever we were. We don't talk about it much now. Mark takes a different route home. I sometimes drive past that stretch and listen to the radio and imagine someone in a hat standing under a porch light with a jar of coins, waiting to see how far a small man will go to test his fear. Headlights can be promises or threats. My wife and I are people who like structure groceries on Tuesday, laundry on Sunday, a family calendar that looks like a neat spreadsheet. The night the GPS betrayed us started like many others. A trip to visit her mother for a quick dinner in the country. We took the scenic route because that's what the app suggested at the time, like a judge handing out a sentence. Around 9:30 p.m. the app said, "Turn right," and we turned onto a gravel road that narrowed fast. The trees leaned in and the phone's blue arrow bobbed like a skiff. "Odd," my wife said. It was not the main road. The little line of the app winked and promised a shortcut. I trusted it because I trust maps. That is a story I tell myself and the world. The gravel wound between old hedgerows then opened into a long lane with fences, horses, and a farmhouse with a porch light. At the first fork, the GPS whispered, "Turn left." But when we turned, we found ourselves facing a gate that had been padlocked and draped with yellowing caution tape. We reversed and the app stubbornly recalculated. It told us to take the right. We did. That path narrowed to a single track. For a while, we drove like tourists in a museum, breathless with the romance of country lanes. The app's voice became less confident with the distance. We drove past a house with a porch light and the faint silhouette of someone moving inside. No one came out. The lane ended at a wash where a culvert had overtaken the road. The headlights reflected off the water like twin eyes. I put the car into reverse and realized the sky had taken a different quality. The stars weren't where we thought they were. The GPS blinked and declared it was recalculating, and then this is the line I will never stop repeating. The blue arrow started heading on a path that wasn't a road. It cut across a thin strip of field and then pointed into a corpse of trees where a faint line was visible between the trunks. We turned the car off because our cells showed no signal. It was the sort of silence phones have when the world swallows them whole. My wife wanted to walk back to the main road. I thought the right move was to stay with the car. That hesitation is a small thing you will regret. We walked because the car felt like a cage and because my wife insisted. The tracks we followed were narrow and wet. In the darkness, something moved and a whistle ran along the treeline. My skin bristled. After 20 minutes of walking over roots and mud, we stepped into a clearing and found that every tree root had been damply scraped along in a tidy pattern like someone had circled the tree with intention. In the center lay a discarded GPS device, trash in a way that seemed planned. Someone had thrown it there like a false breadcrumb. The strangest piece: the GPS was set to home, but the coordinates were wrong. When we booted it up, it drew a path that cut across a farm field and through someone's private land, suggesting a drive that did not exist. It said to proceed 200 meters straight into trees. Then it reset. We hiked back to the car and found the tires slashed in a neat pattern, 3 incisions per tire around the tread. We had no phone and no option to call for help the way you would expect. We walked back to the porch lighthouse where a man in his 50s answered in a robe, eyes blank and tired. He said the lane had always had problems with kids with devices and shrugged, which in small towns is the preferred way of saying, "We have our stories." We flagged down a pickup 3 hours later who drove us to a main road. He had a lantern and a jar of coins. The coins clinked in the box of his truck like small and useless bells. The GPS had been removed from our car by then. No one could explain who had done it. The sheriff suggested pranksters. The farmer suggested something. Older maps are not always innocent in the country. People told us the GPS might have been hacked or set with mischief. People said many things to put the night back into sentences we could digest. We never trusted that route again. For months, the night terrors involved maps and arrows pointing to trees. I tell this story because it is the kind of small invasion that rearranges how you read the world. Technology is not neutral. It is an instruction set that can give you a path or a trap. Sometimes the directions are wrong on purpose. I'm a commuter by necessity. My job requires me to react fast and dwell in gray-lit corporate complexes. On a slow Tuesday at 2 a.m., when the office is a place of breathing fluorescent lights, I had the kind of shift that leaves you in the parking lot with a half-empty thermos and a different rhythm to your hands. As I was sliding into my car, a service van pulled into the lot. We'd seen it around before, the sort of van companies use for HVAC, the ones that wear a brand like a badge. The driver, a short man with a beard, looked polite behind the glass. He idled in the lot for maybe 20 minutes and then drove off. Later on, shift, a coworker said the van had turned into a back row and stopped. We shrugged. Unless you've had to be the last to leave the office before dawn, you forget how space feels like it stretches out for the keeper. At 3:10 a.m., the lights flickered and then the AC hummed wrong. I walked outside for a cigarette, and as I rounded the far end of the building, I noticed the van again, parked where it could be unseen from the office windows, lights off, engine cold. I walked closer and heard the faintest rustle from inside the rear, canvas on metal. I knocked on the door in some illogical diplomatic hope. No answer. I pressed the handle and it turned. The doors opened and inside were neatly stacked boxes, the kind with small parts and a blanket on the floor. But there was also a small bed made from an old office chair, a battery-powered radio, and on top of a toolbox, a folded photograph of the office at night. The photo had been taken through a rear window, a picture of the rows of desks with our monitors sleeping under blue light. I felt stupid. I should have called security, but the night does funny things to courage. Instead, I closed the door and leaned back, thinking about the idea that someone had used the van to sleep and to watch. When I told a guard the next morning, he shrugged and said the van had a permit. Maintenance needs to sleep sometimes, he said. There was that same casual shrug of people too used to having stories. A week later, the description of the van came up in an internal email about unauthorized vehicles in our lots. A security officer came to talk to me and said they had found no evidence that a person had been living in the van. Maybe an overnight tech, one officer said. Maybe nothing. They were good at the language of maybe, a word that reassures and also shrinks. Then a month later, another coworker stopped me and asked me if I ever saw taillights across the parking lot at 2 a.m. He said one night he had pulled up and found a figure under his car with a pocket knife, like someone trying to examine the undercarriage for fun. This is why we lock our cars now, because we think a parking lot is neutral until someone makes it personal. I've come to a small conclusion. It's not the van that unsettles me. It's who decides a place of work is good enough to spend the night and how little of that choice requires proof. We like to imagine a van is a tool and that tools are neutral. Sometimes tools hold people who need them and sometimes they hold people who watch. I don't walk the same route back to my car at night anymore. Some vehicles are temporary homes. I used to tell myself I had a carefully measured life. Work, a small apartment, a manicure of order. Then one night on the interstate, the world made me feel the size of a button and I learned how fragile our routines are. It was raining, the sort of rain that paints everything in gloss. I was driving home from a late shift, windows streaked and the wipers keeping a slow time like a metronome. A red light appeared in my mirror at an impossible distance, too far to be another car and too steady to be a reflection. It hovered near the far lane like a little lantern. At first, I thought it was a truck with rear running lights, then a service vehicle with a hazard marker, then some whimsical thing. As I speed a little to pass off the anxiety, the light adjusted. It matched my speed with a slow patience. The usual rush of passing other vehicles dropped away, and in its place was the awareness of one tiny light that had nothing to do with any geometry I trusted. I pulled into the rest stop and the light pulled in behind with no sound. The attendant gave me a look when I asked if the place had cameras. "We do," he said, pointing at the booth while his expression gathered like a cloud. The recordings showed a streak of red on the edge of the highway, a small dot that moved oddly across flicker frames with a pause like film that had decided to hold still. It's impossible evidence. A dot in grain. A trucker came by and told me a story about lights that get tired of being lights and decide to follow, and he laughed like someone telling ghost stories on the register of reality. Maybe he was right. Maybe there was a rational explanation. Bicycle lights, a person with a flare, a malfunctioning lamp on some truck. But I know what I saw in the mirror. A single red eye keeping its distance, patient enough to wait while I slept at the wheel. On the way home, the light stayed in the mirror and aligned itself lane for lane. When I slowed, the light slowed. When I accelerated, it accelerated. The math of it was grotesque because it refused to obey the common rules. I decided then to be bold. I made a sudden left and took a roundabout exit and turned under the bridge. I drove fast enough that the dashboard told me to be ashamed. When I looked again, the light was right at the end of my rear view like a punctuation mark at the end of a sentence. At the end of my street, I slowed and the light rolled on like a boat, slowing in sympathy, then passed the crossbar and vanished into a driveway with a flash like a wink. I watched the hum of the neighbors and realized I was shaking. The next morning, I called the police and they said they'd had reports of somebody driving in the area with odd lights. Nothing came of it. A forum I haunt later had a thread where men posted pictures of single red lights like a constellation. Someone wrote a line that read like folklore, "Red lights stitch the road to the night." Months later, driving past a hardware store, I saw a small red LED flash in the window like some cold heart. I thought about that night and realized something. The world we negotiate on the road is a corridor of trust maintained by small things. Rules, lights, lanes. When one small thing refuses to play by the rules, the corridor collapses into stories we tell each other later to make sense. I never did find out what that red light was. I keep my mirrors polished now, like someone laying a prayer. These were 6 real-style stories of driving that turned into something else. If you've got a night on the road you still think about, email it to scaredalessamond@gmail.com. Keep it neat and true style, we might read it. Please subscribe for more true scary stories. Good night.